for this important, timely discussion on connected and electric vehicles. We know that everybody is busy in the holiday season, so we appreciate you taking your time to be with us today, but it's a real treat, and I'm joined with a group of 4 experts that we're going to have a real fascinating discussion on what's happening in the mobility space today. Just a little bit about the organization, if we haven't met before. The Emerging Tech Exchange was previously the IoT Consortium, and we have expanded our remit to cover all emerging technologies, including blockchain and crypto and metaverse, and yes, even NFTs. But today's session is going to be on connected and electric vehicles, which is a sector which has been really growing over the past couple of years and has been supercharged with the recent pass of the infrastructure bill in Washington, D.C., and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jeff Hanna from SBD Automotive, who is going to walk us through a little bit of research that they have conducted over the previous couple of months. And then we've got a fascinating panel that we'll have afterwards. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat there. We will do our best to get to as many as possible in the hour session. And just a quick housekeeping note for anybody that's coming to the Consumer Electronics Show in January, we plan on hosting this session live in person. So please reach out to us to join that as well. And we're also hosting about 7 other events at the Consumer Electronics Show. But let's get into today's discussion. Jeff, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks so much, Greg. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and welcome to today's session. Greg, can you see my screen?
We're good, Jeff.
Excellent. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for the Emerging Tech Exchange for having me. As Greg mentioned, my name is Jeffrey Hanna. I'm with a company called SBD Automotive. We're a global automotive technology research and consulting firm covering exclusively the CASES technology. So connectivity, ADAS and autonomy, shared mobility, EVs, as well as security and cybersecurity as well. So really got a big challenge to cover everything happening in connected cars and EVs in just about 5 to 10 minutes here. So, the main takeaway with connected cars is really every automotive OEM is committed to connectivity. Our forecast at SBD Automotive says that 69% of new vehicles sold in 2021 globally will have a built-in modem. We're seeing automotive OEMs put connectivity in as standard, making it available for 5 to 10 years. We've also seen a ramp up of 5G commitments. So most automakers have 4G today. In the next 3 years, about a dozen automakers globally will have 5G in the car. So why is connectivity so important? And from the automotive perspective, it's really 2 main factors. Externally, you can see a lot of ways that car makers are trying to monetize connectivity. Of course, bringing people back to the dealer, and subscription revenue is really where it's at for many years. But we're seeing increasingly the idea that the car is really a piece of software, and digital features and services are being added over the lifetime of the vehicle. We'll talk later about smart cities and V2X and a whole emerging industry about taking vehicle data, diagnostics, location, commercializing it through third parties. So you think of the top half in the many billions, you've got below the surface, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of value, and just taking what the car is telling the automaker and really improving. So things like warranty avoidance, alerting when an accident happens so the automaker can repair that vehicle. And really the idea that the car gets better over time through software updates. So we're seeing a major uptick, especially with electric vehicles, in firmware over-the-air update savings. So if you own a Tesla, you're basically getting those at about 90 per year. but every automaker has plans to do OTA in the near future. So turning to electric vehicles, this has really been our number one sort of topic among our clients at SBD Automotive. And you have many things driving the market. So traditionally it was EV incentives, sort of EV portfolio balance, and really market drivers, whether it's health awareness, the growth of premium automakers. And what we've done here is looked at really the shift from internal combustion engines to EVs. We've got this pegged at about 15% globally by 2025. And really, the reasons vary differently by market. So in China, we're seeing more and more about quality and fragmentation push to OEMs to really consolidate. With EVs, we've seen incentives sort of phasing out internal combustion engines by 2030. And really a lot of the growth in the EV market is done through incentives. And really we've got a whole new wave of full-size trucks. I know we'll talk about the Ford F-150 Lightning today, but really all the major competitors are bringing out full-size trucks that'll be electrified really in the next year. So let's talk about the voice of the consumer. So it's not really a slam dunk that EVs will happen. What we did through a recent consumer survey is say, well, what are the top reasons preventing consumers from purchasing an EV? And if you look at that dark blue diamond, it's almost over-indexed among US consumers. Many of these are around not enough places to charge, of course, range anxiety, but a number of issues in terms of just knowing what it costs to charge, how do you charge from home, how do I do that on the road? So a lot of basically operational issues when it comes to EVs is really preventing faster adoption overall. And when we think about electrification, it's more than just batteries. So if you're out there thinking about business opportunities where connectivity fits in, this is just showing how EVs are disrupting almost every part of the EV value chain. Infotainment screen sizes are getting larger. There's special ADAS and cabin preconditioning functions just for EVs. Marketing. On the maintenance side, we work with a lot of clients who are looking at potentially lower service rates because there's just less to repair. Cybersecurity comes into play, especially as you're plugging into third-party devices, and really a major uptick in the fleet market. So this could be fleets charging, fleets giving energy back to the grid, and everything in between. And it's important to remember that automakers are by no means experts in this brave new world. So what I've tried to do here is just outline what are all the different pieces of the EV ecosystem that have to be stitched together for a winning experience. So on the left, certainly things like manufacturing and build out of batteries, but you also have cloud providers, a lot of data analytics, fleet management companies all getting into the EV space. And down below, how are automakers and others going to work with charging operators, vehicle to building, vehicle to grid, and optimizing distribution at the right day part. And then finally, if you looked at the recent auto shows in Europe, it's all about sustainability. So looking at how do you shred the car, what are recycling options, second life opportunities, and those are really new to the automotive industry overall and are playing a bigger and bigger role. So just to give you some snapshots of some of our recent testing with EVs and why, the EV experience isn't quite there yet is, EVs are interacting with a complex world. So it could be things like hidden charging points, really how do you pay for EV charging, incomplete information, and then finally, how do you calculate the range overall? And finally, we promised as a panel we're not going to talk too much about COVID today, but really this idea that COVID's changing just about everything. People are changing their shopping patterns overall, but at the same time, the role of the dealer is still pretty strong in our own consumer research. You can see there in the blue bar things the consumer wants to do online, like configure the car, really explore the range, and still a number of things preferred to do at a physical dealership, whether it's agreeing on the price, picking up the keys, registrations about 50-50, and everything in between. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Greg so we can go ahead and get started with our panel. And hopefully I left you with some food for thought for today's topic.
Jeff, always great research. Thank you for kicking us off and setting a benchmark for our discussion today. I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists and eager to dive into this discussion. So I'm going to start with Samir Sharma, good friend of the Emerging Tech Exchange. Just give a quick hello and introduction to who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Greg, and a pleasure to be here. As Greg said, my name is Samir Sharma. I'm the Global General Manager for Smart Cities and Transportation at Intel. And what that means is everything around mobility in a city and outside, transportation infrastructure, security and sustainability. Those are the focus areas for my team. And our job is to make sure we are bringing together the best of all the investments Intel is making in edge AI, network, and the cloud, and help our partners use those technologies to bring the best possible solutions to the market.
Thank you, Samir. May.
Hello, and thanks for having me on the panel. This is May Russell from Ford. I lead the organization that creates digital products for Ford around maintenance and repair, safety and security. So a lot of the things that Jeff talked about as kind of above the iceberg and below the iceberg, as well as digital products and services for our commercial fleet consumers. And Jeff talked about that as well. They're a really big segment of our population and have dramatically different needs in terms of their digital and connectivity services that they require.
Thank you, May. And Sue, welcome.
Hi, I am in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I lead a division in Honda Research Institute focusing on advanced research related to connected and automated vehicles and other road users. I particularly enjoy Jeff's first slide on the connectivity and how many OEMs are committed to connected implementation in the vehicle. And that's exactly what we're looking on, mixing the connectivity with automation and see what additional value we can bring to our customers.
Thank you, Sue. All right, let's dive in because we have a lot to chat about in the next 45 minutes. Just a reminder again, if you have questions, to put them in the comments and we'll get to as many as we can. So I alluded to the fact that the infrastructure bill was passed in Washington, D.C. and the past 2 years, we've seen a digitization of everything, both corporate and on the consumer end. And so it's an exciting time for the connected car and the electric car industry. In the infrastructure bill, there is provisions for highways, broadly for transit, for safety, for further research, aviation, multimodal and freight, electric grid security, and perhaps most importantly, broadband equity and access. And so I'm going to start with you, Samir, and just any thoughts that you have about the infrastructure bill and the relevance to this conversation today. What do you expect to see to be deployed, let's call it within this next 6 to 12 months, based upon the renewed interest in infrastructure in the U.S.?
Great question, Greg. And before I dive into the U.S. infrastructure bill, let me give a bit of a global view as well. All of us are in the U.S., so we tend to hear the U.S. headlines in the media a bit more than what's happening in the rest of the world. But there's similar focus on infrastructure as a productive form of government-driven investment to drive GDP, to drive more economic output. We see this happening in Europe, where there is focused effort on creating smarter highways, better traffic management solutions, better utilization of public transit. In India, the Prime Minister recently announced a $1.3 trillion Gati Shakti program, they call it, which is a fancy name for basically speed speed with which the economy can function, with which the people can move, right? And then the power it brings, how it empowers people. So now we come back to the US bill, which was a subject of a lot of excitement, and we've been sort of waiting to see it passed. And my team and I were very happy when the details came out. So the overall spending is more than $1 trillion, as you know. And out of that, about $550 billion is going to be spent on physical infrastructure. If you break it down, there are three big buckets. The biggest bucket is around transportation infrastructure, roads and highways, bridges, airports, ports, and we'll come back to all of these contribute to the supply chain issues we're facing throughout the economy. Then there is, as you pointed out, Greg, money allocated for broadband initiatives, for clean air availability, clean water availability, and so on and so forth. And I think this was a reflection of how there is overall agreement that the U.S. infrastructure is really overdue for an overhaul. I mean, our highway system was created in the 1950s by the president signing the Federal Highway Safety Act, right? And it was patterned on partly on the autobahn development that was happening in Germany around the same time. Since then, we have, aside from regular maintenance, we really haven't invested to upgrade the sort of the ability of our highways, of our infrastructure to function in a better way. And if you think about everything that has happened in the last 60 years on the technology front, this is a huge missed opportunity. So our belief is this money will be spent as much on physical infrastructure as it will be spent on the digital overlay to both help the new infrastructure function more effectively, but also the existing infrastructure to be in much better shape on an ongoing basis. And so we are extremely excited. And the most impressive part that I see in the bill is our teams are going through it and realizing there are deadlines for how this money will be allocated and spent. And there's going to be earmarking on specific projects, which sort of addresses one of the bigger concerns in government spending sometimes people have, where federal funds to state, to city, to an agency, what will happen, how long will it take? So there's specific earmarks and proposals being structured to accelerate that deployment of the funding. I'm on the board of advisors for a group called Center for Transportation, which is a bipartisan think tank, and just tremendous excitement in our last board of advisors meeting. So we can talk about this for another couple of hours, but I'll turn it back to you, Greg. Hopefully, my fellow panelists and you share the excitement that I just expressed around this bill.
Well, I'm going to go to May next, and I'm certainly excited about the movement and the bipartisan movement within the country. May, we had this discussion about a year ago, you and I, with an intimate audience like we have today. And one of the questions that you and I were chatting about is whether the more interesting conversation is it taking place within the vehicle itself, or is it taking place outside? Because Samir sort of spoke to both pieces about how city infrastructure or furniture will be affected, but also where the seat that you sit in at Ford, you have an enormous role to play in developing the internal infrastructure as well of the car. So from your lens, and they're both exciting, where's the most excitement kind of happening?
So I think it definitely goes in parallel. I think there is a tremendous amount of movement that needs to happen outside the vehicle from an infrastructure aspect, as well as in the vehicle. I think some of Jeff's charts that he showed earlier in terms of, and let's talk about perhaps electrification specifically, which is kind of the next really big wave in terms of mobility. But if you take a look at people's concerns, around the purchase and operations of electric vehicles. Some of it is related to the vehicle, like range. A lot of it is related to infrastructure. Where do I charge? How do I know it's reliable? What's the cost, etc.? That is a massive inhibitor for many, many people. That is something that is somewhat outside the control of direct OEMs, and certainly a function of kind of enterprises, utility companies, charge companies, startup companies, and it's certainly an infrastructure concern along long highway stretches. How and where do people get charged? So there is an aspiration to provide carbon neutrality. There's an aspiration to reduce emissions, etc. And electrification is a really, really big component of that, and a really big kind of enabler for the success of that is the appropriate infrastructure in order to enable that. So first and foremost, that has to be addressed. We can make fantastic vehicles that are electrified. We can improve range. We can provide amazing customer experience both in and out of the vehicle, software updates that really extend and prolong the life of the vehicle and provide that surprise and delight and increase residual value and at the end of the day, one of the most important pivots for us in mobility is electrification. And until there is the appropriate infrastructure that is consistent enough that it develops confidence for the consumers, we're not going to quite get there. We already have amazing electric vehicles that customers love. We really have to resolve the charge issue.
That's very helpful, May. And specifically on that electrification, last week we held a session on the digital home, which we often do, and that was a key component also of the evolution of the digital home. Is just the consumer understanding a little bit where more than she or he had before about where the energy is derived, how is it paid for, and how can it be conserved. I think the really nice thing that's happening now in the United States, and Samir gave us a good framework of what's happening internationally, is that perhaps more than has happened over the past couple of decades, I would say, is that there's an interest broadly in the nation of understanding our infrastructure a little bit better. So some of it will come from the top down, and some of it will come from the consumer up, of pushing for more infrastructure to take place, because more consumers, partially for sustainability, partially for economic reasons, want to convert to electric vehicles. Sue, I want to turn it over to you too, because we've, in these sessions that we've done, we've talked to many consumers that are spending much more time in their vehicles than ever before. Some of that is for pure enjoyment. They just like to drive. Some of it is from a safety perspective or a perceived health perspective, that not as comfortable going in public transportation. So they're spending more times in their vehicles. Curious what you see as the evolution of connected vehicles from your lens. 5G is coming down the pike. Would love for you to give your perspective on where that stands, and what are consumers particularly looking for as it relates to connectivity in the car.
We consider connectivity as several flavors. The traditional telematics, where the consumer can talk to an agent when they need emergency help, versus the V2X direct communication that introduce safety element of a connectivity, towards the future that would be a combo of all these elements. And the connectivity technology would be almost invisible to the consumers. And that is, and we, the previous two panelists talked about infrastructure. That's what we also realized too, whether it's direct communication or through the network. Those connectivity with infrastructure would bring the day one benefit, especially for direct communication. I was part of the early explorations stage of a DSRC and connected vehicle for safety. And at the end, Honda decided to fund the development of infrastructure messages. So a lot of signal, faith, and timing and map messages people are using globally, those actually were developed and paid by Honda, because we realized infrastructure is such a critical element of the connectivity for both safety and mobility and other comfort features. What we're working with the Ohio government is to introduce a new concept called a smart intersection, where the infrastructure are sending messages for unequipped vehicles or pedestrians, so that if you have the technology, you don't have to count on other cars or pedestrians have the same technology. The infrastructure would do the proxy transmission. And you can find more information just by typing Honda Smart Intersection on YouTube. Yeah, it's a good video introduction. And you mentioned 5G. So in addition to the direct communication, we are also working with the Verizon Wireless, starting by explore the capability at M-City in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're also in discussion with other government entities to see how quickly we can roll out such system in real world to do more validation towards a real deployment. For starting with safety, because safety is the foundation of a comfortable and worry-free riding. Then we can talk about mobility and other features that enhance people's experience.
Thank you for that, Sue. Jeff, I want to turn to you. And in our chats prior to this session, you and I were talking about new business models that are being created. And a core part of the Emerging Tech Exchange is bringing together corporate startups in the public sector to help to have discussions and partnerships around new business models. So we talk a lot about safety and convenience as part of the Emerging Tech Exchange in all avenues, in the home,
Yep.
in retail and work, and certainly in the transportation sector. Curious from your perspective about business models related to both connected and electric vehicles, and how much safety is a driver for consumers today to pay more for either a vehicle itself or the technology. And sort of second part to that question is, what are you seeing that they're interested in paying more for today?
Yeah, it's great, Greg. And my former employer at GM OnStar just celebrated 25 years of being in the market. And that brand itself is really founded on a safety and security value proposition. And now you've got almost every car maker providing things like automotive collision notification, security services, and then you've got a lot of connected advanced driver assistance systems. So won't get into all the SAE levels, but really where we're at is sort of level 2+ in many ways. But this idea, and you know, the automakers are running TV commercials around this one, is this idea that on certain highways that are mapped, you've got front-facing cameras, driver monitoring systems, connectivity to keep the car up to date, and you're able to take your hands safely off the wheel. So it really seems like a race in many ways to give the customer time back while they're driving. And where all this sort of impacts the business model is it's one that car makers think they can charge more for. So if you look at automakers like Tesla, just over the year, you can upgrade your car to sort of full self-driving, and they're getting $10,000 for that. Many of these hands-off systems are going to provide for a length of time and then charge several $100s a year for those. So there is an opportunity, and really a lot of that is driven by software. So we've spent a lot of time at SPD Automotive working with our clients on enabling a software-defined vehicle. This idea that you separate the hardware and the software becomes something to monetize over time. So this idea that you can add features over time, you can standardize hardware and differentiate on software is really where the game's going. So a lot of car makers are talking about, you know, they'll continue to make 5 to 10% margins on selling the car, but then near 100% margins on digital services throughout the car's lifetime.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
Interesting you brought up, we're seeing a lot more in terms of cameras and certainly sensors as a safety measure within vehicles. But one of the areas that we spend a lot of time talking about at Emerging Tech Exchange is video and video analytics. And we're particularly seeing in the home, one of the drivers of connected technology in the home are video doorbells and also security cameras. And part of that is safety, and part of it is just neighborhood sharing. Individuals that are interested in sharing information about when their packages are delivered or the kids are outside, as well as the safety aspects and theft aspects. And so I'm curious to kind of get everybody's perspective on that in the vehicle. About, it could either be in the vehicle or outside of the vehicle, about how do you see the role of video evolving as we move into connectivity? And May, why don't I start with you on that side?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a couple, probably 2 or 3 different applications. Certainly one of them is, from just a retail use. So you and I and regular consumers interested in safety and security by having our vehicles, having, being able to see where our vehicles are and what's going on around our vehicle. If you are carrying passengers, if you're an Uber driver, you want to be able to have that for passenger safety in your own. We're seeing another use where vehicles mounted on cameras mounted on the vehicles are being used for third-party reasons. So if you agree to have that, you can broadcast various images along your journey that can be used for a lot of different things: highway mapping, conditions, weather mapping, etc. We're seeing a third use for commercial customers where it really is a safety and security aspect. They're interested in cameras in the beds of their trucks, or if you've got kind of a van, so in the back of the van, so that they can monitor how the equipment is being handled, or if there's any loss in the equipment. So certainly a really wide spectrum of use cases around cameras and kind of that visual imaging for a lot of different personas that might be interested in that.
Sue, I want to ask you that too, as well as you started to talk about the 5G deployments, because I think one of the use cases or benefits of 5G, both from an upload and a download perspective, is video, right? And its
Yes.
various forms of video. And so curious if what you're seeing from Honda and the work that you're doing on where you see a video evolving in this connected vehicle, electric vehicle space.
So we established another version of a smart intersection near the Honda campus in Marysville, Ohio, in which the video image are captured by the infrastructure and uh, broadcasted to other vehicles. So imagine you're getting off from freeway and then there's a truck blocking your view on the left side. You're trying to turn right, and then there's a T-bone coming traffic you just cannot see. With the video sharing, you can see through that truck on your left side when you're trying to make a right turn. And we consider this could introduce a tremendous safety benefit, because up to now, all the V2X exchange are, we call the metadata. It's interpreted data, not raw. It's like a backup camera, whether they give you a warning someone is there or just show you the image, then you can judge whether that situation is relevant to you. And this is the same way. You would be seeing through that truck, knowing if there's a traffic coming, the type of vehicles, whether it's motorcycle or pedestrian, and you can make your own judgment. So that is making really eliminating the blind spots. And we think that has great potential, and it's actually running. So and anyone who come to Ohio, we certainly would open to giving you a live demo of that. It's the first time when I saw it was like, wow, we're seeing the future that probably won't be largely deployed for another number of years. We have it at a Honda campus already. And another, not necessarily video sharing, but the vehicle sensor data sharing, the raw point cloud and other LiDAR radar data without vehicle processing that, interpreted, just send it to the cloud or to another vehicle. That's another 5G benefit because of the large pipeline and the bandwidth.
Samir, your work is global in scope, and we've started to talk about use cases in India and in Europe that are perhaps more advanced than here. What do you think is the biggest business challenge that we're facing? And why don't we focus it just on North America, in the connected and electric vehicle? We talked about the need for more infrastructure. What do you see as the biggest business challenge that we're facing here?
I think the biggest business challenge is, by the way, I love the examples that were just given. I was nodding my head because on the previous topic of video by far is the most powerful IoT sensor. I call it the eye of the IoT. And the amount of data processing that's required, bandwidth that's required, opens up so many possibilities. So I was very happy to hear those examples. To your question about the biggest business challenges, I think if you look at all of these use cases, they're actually in an industry that's heavily regulated. So the policy structure has a big contribution to the success and the pace and the scale of these deployments. And historically, that, along with the funding, has been the biggest challenge. I think with infrastructure bill, we've taken a big step forward, but there is still a lot more continued work that will need to be done. In the US, we have a federal structure. That's the form of government we've decided is appropriate for us, and there are many benefits to it. But one of the challenges is decision making is very fragmented. And so when you're trying to find scale, and economies of scale, and you try to have the same replicable solution deployed at multiple places, it becomes a challenge. And that scalability ultimately comes down to, okay, I own a P&L, I want to go invest, but how do I hyper customize to every city, every transportation agency's needs? At the same time, I find enough commonality to be able to scale. So as a technology provider, that's my biggest challenge and that I'm constantly working through. To give you a simple example, you see these boxes on the side of traffic intersection. We call them roadside units or roadside equipment. It's increasingly becoming the source for not just video analytics at the edge, but also 5G small cell deployment. Because with higher frequencies in the 5G spectrum, physics tells you higher frequency, higher attenuation, shorter range, and therefore you need a lot more repeaters. Where are you going to put them? It has to be combined with the city furniture. But those roadside units have a different spec for every county. The paint has to be a different color and shape. The deployments have to be done through a select set of vendors. And so now you imagine influencing on a standardized architecture and building a multi-service platform. The challenge that involves in harmonizing all of this is tremendous. And my belief is, I think, with the infrastructure bill funding coming in and real, economic benefit on the horizon, I think you'll see some harmonization, or at least that's my hope.
All right, so fragmentation. So it sounds like we need to get Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams in to have a paint standard for our local boxes. Jeff, I want to turn to you. You spend a lot of time talking to auto OEMs about different business models and challenges that they're facing. Right now, in December of 2021, what do you see as the biggest business challenge? And let's start with perhaps the connected car versus the electric car for a second. What do you see as the biggest business challenge they're facing related to the connected car?
Well, I'd say, Greg, more broadly, just the chipset shortage overall in the industry, which in some ways is a nice problem to have. You have more demand than supply. But if you've looked at it, it's impacting things like infotainment systems, heated seats, a lot of the features that are getting increasingly connected. We literally have parts shortages around. So, obviously automakers are advancing their supply chain, playing a more hands-on role, but that's really been a short-term kind of detriment. Now long-term, I think a lot of it comes down to software development. So for literally decades, automakers have sort of more or less outsourced almost everything to suppliers and things. And when we meet with our clients, most automakers are building in-house software teams. And to be able to do that, they've got to kind of compete with the tech giants for the best and brightest talent. They have to be able to validate software that work in an agile format. So it sounds easy to do, but in a very scarce labor market, bringing services in house and being cloud ready and all these things are some new skills for a lot of automakers across the landscape. So that's, I would say, chipset shortage and really labor demand is two of the big barriers at the moment.
Well, I think those are two really important issues that we have to talk about. Let's start with the chip shortage or supply chain. We have a question coming in from the audience now. And one of the things I always say, overseeing the Emerging Tech Exchange, is to follow the headlines in the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times of where the interest is from the financial community. I will tell you, over the last 6 months, there has been an incredible amount of attention to electric vehicles, also chip manufacturing, and more broadly, the global supply chain issue. I was very happy to see that after a year of talking about TikTok, that we've now sort of changed the agenda a little bit in the country. No disrespect to TikTok, but there's other important conversations to be had. And so, Sue, I want to ask you, the global supply chain has really come to a head in the past couple of months, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Partially, it's increased demand, as Jeff said, that there's increased demand for connectivity. There's also the notion of just e-commerce, that there's just more and more. It's very easy to click a button. If you took a look at my front step, You see way too many Amazon packages that are delivered for every category. But then there's also, frankly, just the log jam coming from ship to shore to train to car to home. And so, from your lens and Honda's, how do you think about these global supply chain challenges as we're building the connected and electric vehicle industry? And that's a big question to ask. But is there one particular area within it that's of interest to you and to Honda that you might be tackling?
Well, I'm from the research side, don't really get involved in the logistic and goods movement. But what I can tell here is the resource shortage of talented engineers and scientists with the right skill set and the right mindset to work in automotive industry. I think we're now kind of competing because I'm constantly recruiting new scientists and new researchers as people are leaving more towards the West Coast. In Detroit area, we certainly have the advantage of the environment and with other major automakers and major players here. But we also are seeing talented new graduates not as enthusiastic as decades ago to find a job in the traditional industry and area. I think there's education element of it, but there's also as a manufacturer, we need to enhance our job to make the work more interesting, more exciting, not staying on the traditional research territory, but also going after. For example, my division has expanded from vehicle centric to motorcycle and now micromobility devices, pedestrian safety and mobility. All these features were not in the original scope back in 20 years ago. And we hope by expanding this, and along with many other OEMs' effort to attract more talented individuals, we can talk about chip shortage, but also the human shortage with the right scale. I think it is even more critical to make a sustainable environment for the industry to continue to thrive in the long term.
You bring up really important points, Sue, and I want to turn it to May next because does is so much in the Michigan region to attract talent and oversee particularly females as well in the sector. One just quick anecdote I mentioned about sort of tracking what the agenda is in the financial press, but it's also in the consumer press of what the interest is that helps to drive employment and helps to drive interest in categories. So I do believe that the movement in the press towards these areas is important so that individuals, as they're thinking about career opportunities, see it as an exciting, sizzly field to join. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us as an industry to continue to push that, both on the consumer press and on the financial press. May, I want to turn it to you too to give your perspective on both of those issues. Is that you're sitting right in the heart of the supply chain challenges that we're having as a country, and you're also at the same time doing so much to address the labor challenges that we have. You personally are doing so much. I see that in our conversations. How do you think about just broadly the industry and where we are today in attracting more people to the sector, and also how do we get over these supply chain challenges that we have in the short term to make sure that in the longer term there's a sustainable business that can be run, and also that it's a less fragmented industry that we're all in together. I know that's a lot of questions bundled into one, but I'll turn it to you to give your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think, on the supply shortages and specifically the chip shortages, which kind of, I think, hit the whole industry pretty hard and pretty suddenly, it's a little bit of a perfect storm. I mean, it's a good problem to have in that demand exceeds supply. And, chips are at a shortage. There is so much demand for consumer electronics, and chips are at the heart of it. They're not even, all that advanced of chips. They're pretty basic pieces. But you start to see Ford and many others really take control of their destiny and invest in chip manufacturing specifically. So a way to kind of consolidate the supply chain and identify the kind of the key critical pieces and weak points and start to, again, just take control over that a little bit better so that we can hedge future risks. So that's currently in play. In terms of the other shortage around talent, I mean, to the point that Jeff, Sue, and Samir made over the course of this discussion, it takes talent to create the digital software that's around it, to be honest, and it takes a lot of them. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's the same talent that produces software for Amazon, for Google, for TikTok, for a number of digital platforms. It's really at the heart of it. So we're not competing as an automotive industry against ourselves. We're competing against massive tech companies like Amazon, as well as tiny mom and pop startups that are also needing the same talent. So it's a really different game that we're in terms of attracting that skill set. And like you said, automotive and manufacturing is typically not what comes top of mind when you think high tech and high tech software. But we really are high tech and high tech software. If you think about the type of creativity, innovation, the level of maturity of the software engineering that has to go in and out of the vehicle to make that work, it is incredibly complicated and it is incredibly intellectually stimulating. So, if anything, those should come to top of mind when you're thinking digital and software engineering and tech forward. But we haven't really told our story that way. And so, really, part of it is to create that halo effect and to tell our story of what we really do. A portion of what we do and it's valuable is certainly workers on the line putting sheets of metal together. But a big portion of what we do is creating the software, both in and out of the vehicle. And we have been really trying to evangelize that and create mission and purpose for people. We want to make people's lives better with mobility. We want to increase safety, security. We want to reduce repair costs, increase uptime. There's a huge value proposition in there and a huge mission in there. And a long way to go. It hasn't all been figured out. So really trying to, again, tell our story so that the technology talent out there sees the purpose and the mission and the complexity that is involved. And they have an instrumental part in, making these vehicles work in creating, again, the products that people use on a day-to-day basis. So telling our story is really, really important. Investing in talent early, we're doing a lot with co-op programs. We're doing a lot to enable those that may not typically be able to graduate from engineering fields, supporting them to graduate by offering them internships, co-op opportunities, etc. Because it's really important to kind of increase that pipeline as well, so it's not a zero-sum equation. So all of those, methods and techniques are really important for us to invest in so that we can continue to attract and retain talent, because this need is not going away anytime soon.
That's very helpful, May. Certainly a lot to think about as it relates to attracting talent to this incredibly important field. Samir, I want to turn it to you. I'm leaving today to go to Miami to Art Basel, which if anyone in the audience is not aware, Art Basel traditionally has been a conference around art, and now is as much about crypto and NFT as it is about art, which is an area that has, as we're mentioning about where talent is going, a lot of talent is moving to Web3 and the metaverse. Samir, here's the question that I have for you is that at Emerging Tech Exchange, we're all about facilitating partnerships. And perhaps when we have the next conversation, we could talk about what the meaning of Web3 is and for the automotive industry, but that's not the question. The question that I have for you is about just broader partnerships in this space that you would like to see manifest over the next 6 to 12 months. Is there a particular area in any of the topics, subtopics that we talked about today, from energy to traffic safety to edutainment, if you will, that you would like to see in this sector that perhaps is not as advanced as it could be at this exact moment?
That's a great question, Greg. And as I was listening to Sue and May talk about the talent challenge, right? My brain automatically went to the problem solving part. Okay, how do we go solve this, right? Because the reality is what it is. And I think one of the ways you tackle the overall challenge is by collaborating, by acknowledging that just one company or even a small group of companies may not be really be able to accomplish pulling all these things together. So when it comes to driving standards, when it comes to driving standard interoperability, we need to come together. And as I say, we almost always need a village to build a smart city. I think this is a similar concept will apply over here, which is we all will not be able to get the talent or have the investment needed to make it happen, but together we can. And I think so. Partnerships, ecosystem are at the heart of how this will all happen together. Because keep in mind, a lot of the traditional car manufacturing companies are specialized in mechanical, hardware-based. That's what the car was. And today's car is all about software-defined car or a software-defined vehicle. And so that requires a complete rethink of how we approach it, including capabilities, for example, that Jeff talked about earlier. Um, I think if you look at, let's pick one example. I think the most critical thing in front of us is supply chain, where I think we need to quickly come together and figure out what partnerships will look like. And what I mean by that is supply chain. Chain is the operative word. We need whoever is managing that needs end-to-end visibility. So even within Intel, I'm building partnerships with my counterparts who focus on warehouse and manufacturing, and on the other end, who focus on the retail market to say, how do we pull together a solution that helps define the journey of a cargo, an item, through these different links in the chain, in the supply chain. And I think we need that level of thinking, we need that level of digitization, insights into the data analytics at the aggregate ecosystem level to really solve this problem. And we need to solve it. I'll give you one data point. A shipping container from Shanghai to LA used to cost 2,000, maybe $2,500 pre-COVID. Today, it'll cost you about $25,000. So there is a 10x increase. You're at a price point where you start questioning whether 3 months or 2 months of shipment via ship is appropriate, or do we need to air fly this cargo? And this is not going to be a temporary thing. Our forecast is even when things settle, they'll settle in the region of 10 to 12,000. So we are talking about complete upending of business models here. And I think the winners in this disruption will be the ones who can get ahead of it, figure out what the data strategy, the data analytics looks like, and give that end-to-end visibility to rethink this entire supply chain. That's just one example. We could make the same argument about, traffic management, fleet management, public transit capacity management. It really requires these kind of partnerships to come together. The final thing on partnerships I would say is public-private partnerships, not just a nice to have, fundamental and critical. If we don't bring these two ways of thinking together, I don't think we'll be able to make progress. And frankly, as a society, we'll be underperforming to our collective potential. And so that's why it becomes imperative to do that.
Thank you, Samir. Great perspective. Jeff, love your perspective on that. Samir mentioned about software, becoming the important aspect of this. Let's talk about partnerships for a second. From your lens, I can ask you the tough question: are we ever going to get Apple and Amazon and Google and perhaps others together to have a standard on software in the car, or a partnership to move the connectivity forward? What's your thought? And second part to that is what types of partnerships would you like to see come together that perhaps aren't here today?
Great question, Greg. And I think I'll talk about software in the car first. And really, we're seeing sort of two trends. One is really Google dominating infotainment going forward with Android Automotive Operating System. So we're seeing we've got 6 OEMs committed to kind of the full Google Automotive Services stack. But even underlying Google, most OEMs are moving to an Android-based operating system. And what comes along with that is more developers and more sort of standardization. And in some ways, Android is a perfect example of open source as well. I mean, it started with a Linux heritage, and we're seeing a huge increase of open source software in the car, which is creating many opportunities, many new developers, reducing the cost of software overall. You still have to secure it, but open source is another big trend in terms of what we're seeing from a software perspective. outside of the car where I'd love to see more partnerships. We talked about electric vehicles, really having more visibility from basically utility companies, what they can provide the home, what optimal charging times and things. I think, I'm predicting what's going to happen. We're going to have a huge increase in EVs. And already we've seen strains on the grid and things, and we've got to start that planning now, or in 2 to 3 years when you've got multiple EVs on the same block in constrained places like Los Angeles and others. It could be a tough go. So I'd like to see more of the utility companies and automakers in the room, really advancing that planning now.
Great perspective. Sue, what partnerships would you like to see come to bear?
Well, we are already working with the state government on how to improve the road condition. You probably see potholes popping up as the winter is progressing. Traditionally, vehicles and drivers are the user of the road, but by partnering with the road operators, such as the State Department of Transportation, the vehicle is also capable of collecting the road condition data to provide some real-time incident or, for example, the pothole locations to the road operators, and they can maintain the road even more efficiently or effectively quicker than our ADAS or automated system would perform even better. So the customer and supplier relation is flipping depending on what application you're doing. We could be providing data to road operator as they become our customer, but we're also the user for the infrastructure they're maintaining. Therefore, the relationship between infrastructure and vehicle manufacturers is becoming more and more important.
Very helpful. May, what partnerships would you like to see come to bear?
Yeah, I would echo what Sue said. I think the infrastructure interplay with various mobility modes, such as vehicles, is absolutely critical. That is how we're going to really propel ourselves, whether it's electrification, whether it's autonomous driving at the various levels that Sue referred to. That interplay and that partnership has to be really, really integrated and orchestrated.
Thank you. All right, we only have time for one final question, and this is coming from the audience as well. So they're looking for one bold prediction from each of you within the connected and electric vehicle space in the next year. So go as bold as you'd like to go, and I'll conclude at the end with my bold prediction. But Jeff, I'll start with you. What's your one bold prediction for the next 12 months?
I think you're going to see more announcements around air-based modes of travel, right? So you've got automakers thinking about it, but I think, maybe we extend above the ground. So we've seen, a lot of concepts at CES, but I think that's going to pick up in the next year.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Samir.
I had to find a new one because I had a similar prediction as Jeff in terms of the third dimension of travel.
Oh, sorry about that, Samir.
No, it's all good. But I would say the other area that I think we'll see more acceleration would be from a regulatory perspective, deadlines to start phasing out gasoline-based vehicles and shift over to the electric vehicles. And I think that'll be in parallel, you'll see a higher than expected adoption of electric vehicles.
Thank you. May.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of piggyback off of what Samir said, but I think the adoption of electric vehicles by cities, by commercial fleets, etc., is going to increase dramatically. I think that will actually force the infrastructure issues, whether it's with more proliferation of depot charging, public charging, etc., because they will have, a really big economic need for this. So I think that might provide a really big impetus for solving or mitigating the charge issue, but I do think the adoption is going to go up exponentially.
Stu, we're gonna finish with you.
All right, I think we mostly will see more 5G V2X deployment over the next year or two, with more safety and mobility benefit to our consumers.
And I'll close with saying my bold prediction is much more gamification in this space, both on the electric side as well as on the connected side, is that it will become a a mechanism that provides consumer engagement and also adoption of EVs. So this was a terrific discussion. Thank you all for joining me. Samir, May, Sue, Jeff, and to the audience, thank you for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you all in person, hopefully very soon at the Consumer Electronics Show. Happy holidays from the Emerging Tech Exchange, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody.